Hello and welcome to this pre-recorded feedback event for the June 2015 GCSE examination in resistant materials, 5RM0201. You may find it helpful to have the following materials to hand. Unit specification, so you can refer to unit content and requirements. Mark scheme, to use as a reference for awarding marks. Lead examiner's report, to reinforce content from this event. Question paper, to use as a question reference. The aims and objectives of this event are to provide you with feedback on national performance of candidates in the June 2015 series. Information which considers the variation of candidates' performance on different questions and to explore possible reasons which may explain this variation. The format of the paper is now well established, and again this paper started with 10 multiple choice questions. We start by looking at these 10 questions, which were generally accessible to all candidates. As expected, most candidates performed well on most of the multiple choice questions. However, most candidates struggled to correctly identify that the correct size hole that would have to be drilled when cutting an M8 by 1.2 mm thread is 6.8 mm. Again, the format of question 11A is also very familiar. Here, candidates are either asked to name or give the use of the pictured tools, components, or pieces of equipment. The vast majority of candidates correctly identified the tape measure, a very common tool in use in the workshop, and many candidates correctly identified the use of the centre punch. However, the hole saw was not recognised by many candidates, and the block plane was poorly done. A good number of candidates were able to identify the tool as a plane, but they needed to be more specific given there are a number of planes available to use in a school workshop. We now move on to look at question 11C part 3, which was about the advantages of laser cutting. This type of question, a describe type question, requires candidates to make a point and then to develop it and to give a benefit or consequence. All too often, candidates simply respond to questions such as this with a simple statement, which therefore limits the marks they can score. An example of this can be seen in the first example on screen, where the candidate simply makes two basic statements and was awarded a single mark for each of the two statements, therefore only scoring 2 out of 4. In the second example, the candidate makes a point, it is accurate, and then they go on to say, there will be less materials wasted. In this response, the candidate scored 4 out of 4 marks for this part of the question. How candidates performed well in these question types, a summary. Candidates displayed good subject knowledge in the multiple choice questions, were able to provide correct material properties, avoided using generalized vocabulary, were able to justify their points. We will now look at a few questions which candidates generally found difficult. The following slides pick out a few examples of responses where candidates underperformed generally across the cohort. Question 13A. The candidate offered 2 responses here, but only scored 1 mark for the second property being tough. The justification is not relevant to the property given. The first property given, durable, was not a correct response in this context. It is important in questions such as this that candidates focus on the product and then select appropriate properties of the material given the context, in this case, a screwdriver. Question 13b. Although this appears as a describe type question, it is essentially looking for a definition of the term hardness. The mark scheme identifies 1 mark for abrasive wear and 1 mark for resisting indentation. The candidate response shown scores 1 mark with the statement resistant to abrasive wear. Question 13c, Part 1. On the whole, this question was not well done by the majority of the cohort. Too many candidates focused on the fact that the sharp blade was a long way from the handle. The first example at the top scored 1 mark as it made reference to suitable hand size. The second example scored full marks. In this case, the candidate made reference to the fact that the material is an insulator and used a connective to go on to say that if they hit any electrical wiring, the user would not get shocked. Question 14a, Part 3. Look at the 2 examples here. They scored 1 mark and 4 marks, respectively. Many candidates struggled to achieve good marks for this question. Too often, candidate responses did not demonstrate much knowledge and understanding of the differences between thermoplastics and thermosetting plastics in the context of being used for salad servers. Most marks were awarded for reference to the fact that thermoplastics can be reheated and reshaped, which is what the first example shows. The second example shown scores the full 4 marks, where the candidate has given 2 good points and 2 related benefits or consequences. Question 14b. This question was asking for candidates to demonstrate their knowledge and understanding of the process of laminating. On the whole, it was poorly done, with many candidates showing no understanding of the process or not even making an attempt to answer the question. Essentially, this question required 3 gives, as identified in the mark scheme. The example shown scored 1 mark because the candidate mentioned thin wood. How candidates failed to do well in these questions. A summary. For these questions, less successful candidates failed to justify their answers, displayed poor or weak subject knowledge, particularly in the areas of materials, polythene, the differences between thermoplastics and thermosetting plastics, and manufacturing processes, laminating. Now we will go on and look at the design question, question 12. The format of this question is well established, and candidates should be quite familiar with what is required of them. All candidates who attempted this question were able to gain some marks. Weaker responses typically achieved between 2 and 6 marks. The example here shows a very good response to this question. The 2 ideas provide technically alternative design solutions to the brief. The first solution shows 2 cakes held side by side under a single dome cover. The first solution scores 7. It does not get a mark for identifying a specific process. They do mention the machine that can be used to bend plastic, but it is not specific enough. The second solution shows a cabinet with the cakes held on shelves behind glass doors. This solution also scores 7 marks. It was not awarded a mark for the point relating to the removal of crumbs, where they simply state that they can be brushed away. It is worth noting at this point that a statement which essentially repeats the specification point will not be awarded a mark. An example of this would be where a candidate states that the design has a stable base without any supporting statements or evidence as to how or what indeed makes it stable. It is also worth noting here that the candidate has written a great deal, most of which could have been simplified, saving both time and making it clearer and easier to read and mark. The example on this slide shows a mature and imaginative response to this question. The two ideas provide technically alternative design solutions to the brief. The first idea uses compartments and clearly satisfies the requirements of the specification. Although no dimensional information is given, the detail within the well-drafted sketches clearly shows how the cases would be held, displayed and removed. This response achieved full marks. However, the candidate refers to solid white cardboard, and as cardboard was excluded in the mark scheme, this mark could have been lost. Nevertheless, it was decided that the phrase exhibited sufficient subject knowledge to deserve this mark. In the second idea, the cases could be removed from the side. So the mark for removal and/or replacement was awarded. It was also accepted that the design solutions were sufficiently different to deserve marks for stability and ease of assembly. This example is another good response which scores 10 marks in total. This candidate has adopted a useful technique whereby they mark up 8 boxes around their design in the middle. In each box, they make a specific reference to each of the 8 individual specification points. Both solutions show 2 cakes being held side by side, so a mark is awarded for idea 1, but not for idea 2, as it is a repeat. This is an example of a weaker response. Immediately you can see that there is a lack of annotation. When annotation does appear, it makes reference to wood rather than to specific materials. It is obvious that this response is not going to score highly. Both graphical solutions are also identical, with cakes held side by side, a tray, a lid which opens and made from wood. As such, the first design scores some good marks, 5 out of 8, but idea 2 is essentially a repeat of the first idea. Why candidates did well. A summary. Most candidates found it relatively simple to pick up some marks for their first idea. They were generally able to attract the first 4 marks quite easily. They also found it relatively easy to attract marks for the materials and the process. Performance could be improved by ensuring that all specification points are addressed in technically different ways within each idea. They could try to write less and maybe print so it is easier to read. Activity 1. This is another example of question 12. At this point, you may wish to pause the presentation and use the marking scheme to mark this response yourself. Using the mark scheme, decide what mark you think should be awarded and why. When recording your scores, try using a binary code system, a series of 1s and 0s in a single column to show what you have awarded marks for. Activity 1. The answer. This is a well-presented response, which has been drawn well, although there are no marks awarded for quality of drawing, which scores 7 out of 8 for each of the 2 separate designs. In each case, the mark has been lost for not identifying how the crumbs would be removed. The handwriting and annotation are clear and simple and aid the marking process. How candidates did well in this question. A summary. Let us summarize a few features common to many higher-level responses. Successful candidates produced clear diagrams and made use of supplementary sketches. Showed their design solutions wherever possible. used specific technical vocabulary, produced a second idea which employed technically different solutions for each of the specification points, approached the task in a methodological manner, ensuring that each specification point was addressed within both ideas, annotated each specification point in both ideas. How candidates failed to do well in this question. A summary. On this question, less successful candidates provided simplistic and/or poorly communicated ideas, provided little annotation, used labels to identify design features rather than drawing them, repeated design solutions from their first idea in their second idea, failed to address some specification points altogether, failed to identify specific and/or appropriate materials and processes. We will look at an extended writing question and response. These types of questions are marked for QWC, Quality of Written Communication. Take a moment to read the response. Refer to the mark scheme and decide whether it is a level 1, 2 or 3 response. Pause the presentation if necessary. It is clear and quite well laid out, however, the content is sparse. 2 relevant points are made, but they are not justified or expanded. They make a point about stock control, but nothing else is here in terms of how it might benefit the retailer. Similarly, they make a point about not everyone having access to the internet, which is quite valid, but again, they do not go on to say what the implications are of this. There is very little use of technical vocabulary, and subject knowledge is limited. This response barely satisfies the requirements for level 1, but they did score 2 marks, just. Now, look at this example. This is more characteristic of a weak level 2 response. The candidate makes several relevant points, but does not go on and develop them. The points relate to remembering what sites a user visits, helping the consumer to find the cheapest price, and a disadvantage of dating adverts being shown. Although the points are valid, they do not flow and are not coherent in terms of a balanced view for both consumers and retailers. As such, the response just about makes it into the level 2 descriptor, but it only scores 3 marks. Finally, take a look at this response. This is a good example of a mature level 3 response. This candidate exhibits a good level of subject knowledge, and the argument is detailed and well organized. Points are expanded effectively and technical terminology is employed. The candidate discusses the advantages and disadvantages for both the consumer and retailer in good detail, with reasoned points. This response is definitely a level 3 response as far as QWC is concerned, but because they have used some technical vocabulary with accuracy and precision, well punctuated with good spelling, they can be awarded the full 6 marks. Why candidates performed well in this type of question. A summary. Most candidates were able to provide at least one expanded point, were able to write clearly and legibly, understood that a piece of extended writing was expected. How candidates performed well in this type of question. A summary. Most candidates explored a more limited range of issues in greater depth, expanded arguments through several stages, employed technical vocabulary, used comparative arguments, produced planned and well-organized arguments, exhibited good subject knowledge. Finally, here is a summary of the most important issues. Cover the whole specification content, questions can and do come from any part of the specification. Learn properties of materials and their applications. Practice producing descriptions of commercial manufacturing processes. Practice reproducing diagrams from the textbook. Avoid generic terminology such as cheap, strong, easy, and fast. Refer to specific materials rather than material groups such as plastic or wood. Use spare space on the paper to plan for question 12 and extended QWC 6-mark answers. Read the question and highlight key words or terms. Practice use of connective words in describe and explain type questions. Ensure that information given in the question stem is not repeated in answers. Make sure that answers are neat and legible and do not write outside the space provided. Read feedback for question 12 and practice technique using past papers. Manage time effectively. Allocating 1 minute per question allows 5 minutes to read through the paper and 5 minutes to check at the end. If you would like to know more about examination statistics, you may find these links of interest to you. GCSE English subjects and maths are changing first for first teaching in September 2015, with first assessments in summer 2017. GCEs for a range of subjects are changing first for first teaching in September 2015, with first assessments in summer 2017. We have just published our specifications on the Edexcel website. They have been published early in draft form to enable teachers to have early sight of our proposed approach. We are also running a series of launch events too. Our draft specs and SAMs, as well as further information about our launch events, can be found on edexcel.com. Other GCSE and GCE subjects following in 2016 and 2017. We constantly look to improve the delivery of our training and appreciate all delegate feedback. Delegates will soon receive an email directing them to our online feedback form. The form takes no more than a couple of minutes to complete. Please ask them to take the time to let us know their thoughts by filling in this short form.